Hello everybody, your favourite Uncle Frog here again, bringing you another MEB approved video. And today we're talking about fungus. Well, no, not really. I thought it might be useful to do an occasional event survival guide. But now I think about that, maybe that's badly phrased, an occasional event survival guide. So is it an occasional series, or if you follow my advice, you'll occasionally survive? Not sure. But I thought it might be interesting to talk about fires, in fact. There's a lot of survival guide things you can find on the internet about, how to light a fire. But most of the time they're talking about a small camping fire for a ghillie stove or something. And they're not talking about maintaining that fire over multiple days. It's useful to have a fire starting kit, and at this point I don't mean like a match and a propane can. We're talking about like sort of authentically starting a fire. The starting point is something like this or this. These are bracket funguses. Now, depending on where you live, you may or may not have access to a forest, and if you have access to that forest, you may or may not be allowed to take things out of it. But if you are allowed to take things out of the forest, then go for a stroll. Find a tree that's dead but still standing, and quite often, not always, but quite often, you'll find one of these bracket fungi growing 2.5, 3, 4 meters off the ground. You shouldn't take these things off the tree when they're still flexible or wet. You should wait until they've dried. This is the kind of the reproductive part of the fungus, and this is where the spores come out. And this is the bit that makes it really, really useful. This is very fibrous and hard, and I'm not sure if you can actually, that's going to focus. Is that going to focus? But you can probably see there's lots of micro holes here, and this is really, really useful because maybe you're old schooling it, with your striker light, or maybe you're kind of cheating with your matches. It doesn't matter. If you're outside, there's often wind. It's often difficult to keep the starting point of the fire going. It often goes out. Having a little bit of this in your fire starting kit really, really helps, because it might only be smoking on here, it might not actually be burning, but it will still keep the heat in, and it's a really good starting point. And from that, you should also have some other things, like the shell around hazelnuts or dried leaves. 2 types of pine cone are very useful as well. These more fibrous ones as an early starter, and the harder ones, which are nice and dry, and they help to kind of I suppose make the fire burn hotter. Also having kind of shavings from your workshop if you have one, and dried leaves and that sort of thing. You need to have one of these little fire starting kits, and if you're not being authentic, keep it in a Ziploc plastic bag. If you're being authentic, tie it to your tent post, keep it off the ground. Many years ago, I did a reenactment event up in the Lake District, and that's on the northwest coast of the UK. I think it's on the Irish Sea. Yeah, very close to the Irish Sea, I think. Yeah, just below Scotland. And even by English standards, it's wet. I mean, it's wetty wet. And we had a lot of rain one night, and it seeped in under our authentic tent, made everything in the tent damp. We didn't have a fire shelter at the time, so the fire turned into a small duck pond, really. And the only thing we had that was actually dry was one of the squires had some shredded wheat, which is like a breakfast cereal, and they're kind of like squares of kind of like wheat product, which are rock hard and tasteless when they're dry, and when you put them into milk, they instantly turn into a mush. They are really good fire lighters, though, so maybe you should take some of those with you as well. Once you've got the fire going, having a pair of bellows is really, really useful. That maintains the fire. But also having something called a curfew. Some of you probably heard of this or know about this, especially if you're a later period reenactor. It's you would know about this because they were in many towns. They were actually mandatory. You had to have one, and it's interesting that they're called a fire curfew or a curfew, and that connects with the idea of curfew when you can't go out. I'll put up a picture of one of these things, and they're basically a lid with some holes in it that you stick over the remnants of your fire, and it should keep it smouldering overnight, so it's really easy to get started the next morning. One of the other things I would actually say is a really good idea is to stop using wood for your fire. If you are in mainland Europe, normally, most of those countries, people tend to have wood burning stoves, and so you get high quality wood to burn, but it will still smoke when you're burning it on your fire. In the UK, traditionally we burn coal. We weren't really into burning wood, and so quite often the quality of the firewood you get there is really low, and it's often quite green, so it doesn't burn particularly well. However, charcoal, hardwood charcoal, not this kind of briquette charcoal, but hardwood charcoal, perfectly authentic all the way through, and you don't get blinded with the smoke. You get a hotter fire. It's a lot easier to cook on. You can still use a curfew over the top of it. You can maintain it, and generally it's just a far nicer experience living around a charcoal fire than it is around a hardwood fire. And when I was in England with Regia Anglorum, we had a guy who was a bodger. He worked greenwood, and he also was a charcoal burner, and so he used to supply us with charcoal, and it was just so much better with the burning the charcoal than it was the wood. If you haven't used a curfew before, when you got to be careful taking the curfew off the fire. Make sure you've got like a sort of bit of cloth wrapped around your hand, because the curfew can get quite hot. Not always, but it can get quite hot. You should also go for a high quality curfew. I've seen some low quality curfews explode because there was an air pocket inside the clay. And obviously that expanded and exploded the curfew. So go to a good potter, get a good quality one. When you're lifting it off the fire in the morning, obviously use a cloth because it might be hot, but also it might not be. It might seem to be cold and the fire might seem to be dead underneath. However, it's possible that right in the centre you've still got some burning coals in there. And so you have to be able to lift those burning coals up to a fire very quickly again. At that point, you don't need the bracket mushrooms. You just need the things like the fibrous pine cone or the shells that go around the hazelnuts, dried leaves, something like that. And it should come up very, very quickly. And it's really, really helpful to have a set of bellows at this point. If you don't have bellows, then something you can fan the fire with is useful. Just a flat piece of wood can be helpful. Failing those two things, squires are quite useful as well. Place it close to the fire and get it to blow on the fire. Try not to set fire to your squire as well. They tend to get a little bit annoyed at that point if they start burning. However, if you've got several people, you can go in rotation to blow on this thing and get it back up again. But set of bellows, doesn't need to be massive. that's the best way to go, and you'll get the fire back up again and running. Remember about banking as well. So if you're going to use the fire for breakfast, but you're not going to use it then until, say, lunchtime, you can bank it up and roll it over so it burns slowly, but don't forget to do that. Many people kind of, because they're not used to maintaining a fire over a long period of time, they tend to forget. We used to have somebody kind of like sort of on fire watch, as it were, our little fire warden, and that person would make sure that the fire was still running and occasionally feed it. Don't throw a huge chunk of wood on or a large amount of charcoal. Just keep it running, keep it going until you need to expand the fire out, and then you take it back down again to a small amount until you need to bring it back up again for the evening. You can mix charcoal and wood together as well. Charcoal doesn't give a lot of light off, and so you can have the charcoal base, and in the evening, once you finish cooking and you don't need the kind of like raw heat anymore, you can get a bit more light by putting the wood over the top of it. However, you're probably going to get a little bit more smoke at that point. I think that's about everything, actually. I realise it's turned into a far more serious one than I actually expected. Anyway, these happen sometimes. This happens sometimes. Ha! Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Anyway, let me know if you actually think this is worth doing, because I'll come back to it and do other ones if you think it's a good idea. If you don't like it, tell me. And please don't forget to do all that sort of comment, rate, subscribe, blah, 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 hit buttons and thingy, because that's nice. And I just jog the camera by putting my hands on the table. Bad me. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Arse.